Hello and welcome back. I can barely believe it. This is the first episode of Season 3 of Mysteries of Science. If we've not met before, I'm Dan. I'm the editor of Science+Nature, which is a monthly magazine from the team behind The Week Junior. Today I'm joined by Stevie, our deputy editor.
Hi everyone.
And Michael, our junior editor.
Hello.
On this podcast we take a look at our favourite mysteries of science, which are the strange phenomena and bizarre events that have left scientists scratching their heads and, well, despite their best efforts, remain well and truly unsolved.
So since this is brand new series is being released on April Fool's Day, we thought we would celebrate by looking back at 3 of the biggest hoaxes of all time and try and get to the bottom of why so many people fell for the pranks.
Yes, these are the stories which made April Fools out of everyone. But why do people believe in these unbelievable hoaxes? Are they just gullible, or is there something else going on? So join us as we examine some famous fairy photographs,
take a walk through some crop circles,
and float off into space as the Earth loses its gravity. This is Mysteries of Science. So, Michael, where do we begin today?
Well, Dan, have you ever taken a photo and found that you'd captured something strange, something unexplainable that you didn't mean to photograph? Or perhaps you did mean to. Perhaps you saw something incredible and wanted to take a photo of it as proof. Well, that's what 2 little girls did in Cottingley, Bradford back in 1917.
What were they taking photos of?
Well, believe it or not, Stevie, they were taking photos of fairies.
Really? Fairies? No way.
Yes, Dan, and their photos look so real, so lifelike, that many people thought it was proof that fairies existed. But of course, it was all a hoax. Now, to find out more about how they did it, we spoke to fairy expert Fiona Marr.
Hello, my name's Fiona. My friends call me Tink, and I run the legendary Fairy Festival in Llangollen in North Wales, and it's the biggest fairy festival of its kind in the UK. I've also written a book, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and the Secret of the Cottingley Fairies, which you can get on Amazon. And it tells you the story of how the very, very intelligent Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who invented Sherlock Holmes, got caught up in a hoax which was rigged or fronted by 2 little girls, and they claimed they'd taken actual, genuine photographs of fairies. But unfortunately, it was a hoax.
Do we know how old these girls were? And why do they want to fool us anyway, actually, Michael? Maybe you can help us.
Well, the story goes that it all started out as a way for them to stay out of trouble with their mum.
Basically, the Cottingley fairy photographs, there were 2 little girls who lived in this place, Cottingley. It was a suburb of Bradford, and one of them kept falling into the stream at the back of her house, and her mum would basically hit her and get very, very cross. And so to avoid sort of rows with mum, the pair of them concocted a story that they were actually being lured in to lean too far over the water, and that's why she fell in, and the things that were luring them were fairies. And the story goes that the girls then went and photographed them to prove to the adults that these things existed. And the most famous photograph you'll see all the time is of the younger girl, and she would have been around about 10 at the time. She was called Frances Griffith, and she's sort of sitting, and there are a ring of fairies dancing in front of her, and there's a waterfall in the background. And then there was another one. These girls were cousins, and Elsie was the other girl, dark-haired girl, and she would have been around about 15 at the time. And there's a picture of her with a gnome. So these were the 2 initial photographs.
Oh, I remember these photographs now. I must admit they did look pretty convincing.
Yes, and if any of you want to see the photos for yourselves, then you can ask your parents to search for it online by just searching Cottingley Fairies.
So Fiona says it was all a hoax. I'm interested to find out how these 10 and 15-year-old tearaways were able to create such lifelike photos. I mean, I don't know about you, I'm not sure that fairies exist. I mean, let's see, this was about 100 years ago. It's not like they had Photoshop or anything. Maybe these fairies were real. Where did they come from?
Well, people back then didn't have the advanced photo editing software we use today, Dan, you're quite right, but there were still ways for them to put something in an image which wasn't actually there.
Frances had been brought up in South Africa, Now, these photos were allegedly taken in 1917. So at that time, you had what was known as the Great War, or World War I, raging. And a book had been produced called the Princess Mary Gift Book. And that was sold. It was like stories and illustrations and fairy things. And it was sold for parents to buy their children. And all the profits went to send comforts to the soldiers on the front. That's what they called the front, was where the war was raging in France at the time. And long story short, the youngest of the two, Frances, came back from South Africa, moved to Bradford, to Cottingley, and she had a copy of this book. And in that book was there was like what they call a frieze. It was a little illustration of dancing ladies with all these wonderful sort of draperies around them. And Elsie, the elder of the two girls, she traced these pictures onto paper. She added wings, she cut them out, and she stuck them with pins and a bit of tape into moss in the foreground of the photograph, and then got her cousin Frances to sit there and apparently be impressed by these fairies.
So the fairies were just essentially pictures cut out of a book. Surely people would have been able to see that.
Well, maybe with modern eyes we'd have been able to tell the difference, but as Fiona explains, you have to think about how photographs were taken at the time.
In the old days, photographs had things called negatives that had to be processed to get the photograph. So in a negative, black is white, white is black. That's why it's called a negative. It's the complete reverse image. And later days it would have been on film, but in those days it was on glass. And these glass plates, as they were called, had then to be processed to create photographs. And along the way, a man called Snelling got involved. And it was Snelling's very clever shading that made these photographs look a bit better than they actually were. So it was faked all along. And he was simply improving them as far as he was concerned. So to modern eyes, they don't look at all convincing. But in those days, I think people would have been convinced. I really do.
And when Fiona says people were convinced, she doesn't just mean anyone. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, even thought the photos were real.
I know, wow, it's just so clever. I think they must have been pretty convincing if they fooled the man behind the world's greatest detective.
But how could a man as smart as him be so fooled by them?
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has this wonderful expression. He says, surely there is a magic and a wonder to life. And I think that was what people were looking for. They were absolutely world weary. But also, on top of that, so this was 1920. Now, 1895, so 25 years before that, there was a chap called Roentgen, and he had been playing around with cathode ray tubes, and he had inadvertently invented X-rays. And that would have been amazing, to have a piece of technology that suddenly meant you could just see through solid flesh to bone. And that would have been really quite extraordinary. And if we think back, technology is 25 years old now, very clunky, and because we're moving so fast. But back then, things didn't move quite so quickly. So X-rays, even though they had them on the battlefields of the First World War, they were still quite a new invention as far as anyone was concerned. So people very much were of a mind that how many other unseen things could we see if somebody would just invent the right machine? So they had this whole idea, maybe you can see ghosts, maybe you can see fairies, maybe there are all sorts of things you can see. People were vaguely aware of the idea that there were things beyond the visible spectrum. By visible spectrum, that's light we can see. So either side of that, the light waves continue, but our eyes aren't designed to see them. So you have infrared one end and ultraviolet the other. And they were just beginning to become aware there were a lot more unseen things going on.
So let me catch up here. Once upon a time, people took stories about fairies much more seriously than perhaps we do today. And then new findings in science revealed these strange invisible worlds that exist outside our awareness. And the fairy photos show people what they already expected or perhaps wanted to be true, and they believed them. So when did the girls finally get rumbled?
Well, the girls themselves later admitted to faking the photos, as some people had always suspected they did. But that wasn't the end of the story.
It wasn't until they were very, very old ladies that finally Elsie said, I think it was sometime in the 80s, she actually said, well, actually, yes. And she explained how they were faked. But right until the end of her life, Frances always said, because they took 3 more photographs when they were given cameras to take these photographs with. They took one, they called it the fairy sunbath, which I think is a basic double exposure. And to the end of her life, Frances just kept saying, no, the fairies were real, we definitely saw them.
So maybe there were some fairies after all?
Do you believe in fairies, Dan?
Well, I'd be interested to hear what our listeners think. Do you believe in fairies? Take a look at the Cottingley pictures and let us know whether you're convinced or not. And you can email us on hello@science-nature.co.uk.
Interestingly, Fiona pointed out that these days we actually have a modern version of fairies. Aliens.
We're telling the same stories about aliens as we used to tell about fairies. We've just dressed them up in shiny spacesuits and put them in spaceships. But it's the same, whatever it is, it's the same entity. Do you see what I mean?
It's funny Fiona should say that, Michael, because some people say aliens are behind our next mystery, crop circles.
Oh, this one sounds like a goodie. Tell us some more, Stevie.
Well, let me take you back to the late 1970s when strange circular patterns started appearing in crop circles across southern England. These shapes appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the night and became known as crop circles. But they soon developed far more complex shapes, often related to mathematical patterns. In their efforts to solve the mystery, wild theories began to spread among a community of enthusiasts called, and I love this name, cereologists. Some thought unusual winds were to blame, while others were sure that crop circles were signs left by alien visitors to Earth. There are still people researching crop circles and their effect on people today. I think it's time we speak to our next expert.
I'm Lucy Pringle. My particular interest in crop circles is researching the effect that they have on people.
So Lucy is one of the world's leading crop circle photographers and the co-founder of the Centre for Crop Circle Studies. She first became interested in crop circles when she moved to Hampshire in the 1980s.
I moved house and I came into this area in Hampshire in the end of 1988. And that was about when the early ones were sort of breaking cover and people were starting to talk about them. And in 89, I think I probably went to my first one, 89 or 90. And I found that I was right spot in the middle of the area where they were happening in Hampshire. So this was all a great thrill.
I've seen some of Lucy's pictures and they're incredible, but I've never actually seen a crop circle for real. So I wonder, what would it be like to see a crop circle up close?
The beauty of them is something which is absolutely riveting. Photographs really don't tell you the whole picture, because when you see one in the flesh, you just can't believe the beauty of it and you long to go in.
And that's not all. Lucy says that when people go inside a crop circle, they find themselves experiencing strange things.
As you're walking towards the circle, a friend of mine used to find her knees went weak the moment she got within the aura of it, or the energy, if you like.
So what could be causing people to feel that way?
The answer is we don't know. And this is one of the puzzling and quite frustrating aspects of this phenomenon. There are various things that we still have not found, using the best scientific advice and the best technology, the most modern technology. We cannot find an answer to.
This is a really, really meaty mystery. Do we know how these crop circles were being made? Was it aliens?
Don't forget we're looking at hoaxes here, Dan. So in 1991, two men called Douglas Bauer and David Chorley said that they'd been making crop circles since the 1970s. They made their first in 1976 using a plank of wood attached to a rope. So they did this by holding rope up with a plank of wood at the bottom, and then they stepped down, flattening the crops to make the circle.
So we've been fooled again. But their crop circles aren't the only ones, are they?
No, they only owned up to creating about 250 crop circles, which still leaves more than 1,000 unaccounted for. And some of them seem too complex to have been made by the human hand. So here's Lucy talking about one in particular. It's a crop circle called the jaw dropper, which is made up of 409 circles in a spiral pattern.
Here's something to ponder. If this formation was man-made, allowing for time to get into and out of the field under cover of darkness, the construction time left would be about 4 hours. Given that there are over 400 circles, in fact there were 409, some of which span approximately 70 foot in diameter, that would mean that one of those circles would need to be created every 30 seconds. And that's not even allowing for any time for the surveying, purely flattening. This formation pushes the envelope, and that's a massive understatement. And they end off by saying, my brain hurts.
Yeah, it's definitely a mind bender. Yeah, it's making my brain ache. But if you thought that one was a mind-bending mystery, then just wait till you get a load of our third and final mystery. Now, hold on to your hats, folks, because otherwise you might find yourself just floating away. Do you know what day it is? Of course, it's 0G Day.
0G Day? What's that?
Well, Michael, now then, do you remember anything strange happening on the 4th of April 2014?
The 4th of April 2014. I mean, that was quite a few years ago now, Dan, but I can't say that I do.
What about you, Stevie? Do you remember anything strange? Anything out of the ordinary going on?
Not that I can recall.
What? How can none of you remember? Look, on the 4th of April 2014, if you jumped in the air, you'd find yourself feeling a little bit lighter and maybe even floating in the air for a few seconds and bobbing around. And this is the name. This is why it's called 0G Day, Zero Gravity Day. It was incredible. It was amazing. Famous astronomer is here to tell us some more about this amazing day.
Hi, my name's Phil Plait. I am an astronomer and a science communicator, and one thing I love to do is debunk astronomical hoaxes. Those things spread little fires all through the internet, and I try to stamp them out. So back in 2014, this idea started spreading around the internet that on a certain day, there would be lower gravity on Earth, and that if you jumped up, you would either float or you would feel lighter. You would sort of hang in the air a little bit of extra time. The idea behind this is that Jupiter and Pluto were aligned in the sky. Pluto was going to be directly behind Jupiter. Their gravity would add up, as they claim went, and if you jumped up, that gravity would pull on you and make you lighter.
So maybe this is a silly question here, but why could 0G Day not actually happen?
There are so many reasons this cannot possibly happen. One is that gravity just doesn't work that way. The strength you feel from an object, the gravitational force you feel from it, depends on how massive it is, how much stuff it has in it, and how far away you are from it. And it's a pretty strong relationship. The farther away something is, the weaker its gravity is. Now, Jupiter is a big planet, and it has a lot of gravity, but only if you're close. Jupiter is really far away. Pluto is tiny, tiny, tiny. It's smaller than the Earth's moon, and it's way farther away than Jupiter. So its gravity is basically zero on Earth. Literally, if you're standing next to a car, it pulls on you with its gravity 1,000,000 times more strongly than Pluto does, right? So Pluto basically just isn't a factor here. So it just doesn't work that way. And the other thing is that, think of it this way. the moon is much, much closer than Jupiter is. And now, even though the moon is much smaller than Jupiter, the fact that it's so much closer means that its gravity we feel much more strongly on Earth. And every time the moon passes overhead, you're not floating around. So clearly, Jupiter can't have any effect on us at all.
Okay, so maybe not, but I quite like the idea of getting to float around a bit for one day a year. So, I mean, is there any way we could experience something like Zero-G Day?
Zero-G Day is a pretty funny idea, and I kind of like the idea of, wouldn't it be fun to jump up and float? Now, how would you make that happen? Well, if you could move the moon closer, for example, then its gravity on Earth will be stronger. The problem is, by the time you get it close enough that you would be able to float because of the moon's gravity pulling you up, the moon and the Earth would interact and you'd have huge earthquakes and the moon would be torn apart by Earth's gravity, and that would be bad.
Whoa. The planet being torn apart sounds like a very bad day.
Another way you could do this is if a star, or say a black hole or something like that, were to pass really close to the Earth. But then you got the same problem. Then you have a star or black hole really close to the Earth. And that would be bad. That would destroy our planet. So unfortunately, you can't do this that way. If you want to float, the only way you can really do that is to either go into orbit around the Earth, and then you're falling around the Earth and you experience what scientists call microgravity, or what a lot of people think of as zero-G. Or you can have an airplane which goes up and down in these big wave-like patterns, and when it does that, when it goes over the arc and down, you would feel weightless because you're sort of only under the influence of Earth's gravity. And when that happens, it feels like you're floating.
So maybe Zero-G Day isn't something you'd actually want to happen, Michael. But correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, 2014 wasn't the first Zero-G Day hoax, was it?
As always, Stevie, you're totally right. Zero-G Day actually started as an April Fool's Day prank on a radio show way back in 1976. And it was a joke that was made up by the legendary British astronomer Sir Patrick Moore, whose summer party I've actually been to one year. So there you go.
The beauty of this whole idea of Zero-G Day and the hoax behind it is that it was never real. It was started as a joke by Patrick Moore, who was this great British astronomer who popularized astronomy. And he was extremely popular and had a radio show. And in 1976, he made this claim that you could jump up on Zero-G Day and float for a little bit. And it was just a joke. It was on April Fool's Day.
And did people believe this?
Well, a lot of people didn't catch that it was a joke, and they got phone calls from people saying, yes, I felt it, I jumped up, and for an extra split second I was floating in the air. And the thing is, they may have really felt that, or at least they may have thought they felt that, because there's this idea called priming. And that is, if you're going to get somebody to feel something, you can tell them in advance. You know, some people, if they walk down this corridor, they feel a cold chill on their neck, or fingers running through their hair, you know, in a haunted house or something like that. And then people will walk down that hall and they'll actually feel that because they're expecting to feel that. And anything that happens to you then becomes evidence that what this person claimed is true. And so that's what happened. People thought, this is true. Patrick Moore is saying it. He's this great scientist. When I jump up, I feel it. And they didn't. They really didn't. They just thought they did.
That's fascinating. So in some people's heads, they really did experience Zero-G Day, even if it wasn't actually happening. Perhaps some people almost want to be fooled. But for those of us who don't want to be caught out by a prank, whether that's photographs of fairies, strange shapes in farmers' fields, or a zero-gravity day, what can we do to avoid being fooled?
Right. If you hear something like this, just a claim that sounds a little fishy or just sounds really cool, check the sources. Look, if somebody tweets a photo of a NASA tweet saying, hey, there's Zero-G Day or something like that, the easy way to check that is go to NASA's Twitter feed and check to see if they actually did claim that. And if you can't find the tweet, chances are somebody made it up. Another thing to do is just don't trust what you see online. There are a lot of news sites, quote-unquote news sites, that look real. They sound real, but they're not real. They're people making stuff up. So what you want to do is check other sources. Look for big newspaper sites, big news sites like the BBC or something like that. In the case of Zero-G Day, or people who claim the moon landings were faked, or that some ancient civilization predicted the end of the world on a certain date, talk to an astronomer. We know about a lot of this stuff. I know about it. I research this stuff, so I'm familiar with a lot of it. Check with us, and we'll be able to tell you if what somebody's saying is real or not.
There you go, Michael. That's some really very important advice there. Like I always tell you, always check your sources, and if in doubt, ask a scientist.
I know another good source that Phil forgot to mention.
What's that, Stevie?
Well, the Week Junior Science and Nature, of course.
Boom, that's right. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd also love to solve any scientific mysteries you have. You can email our email address, which is hello@science-nature.co.uk, to share your thoughts with us.
So we've had some amazing questions and comments come in from our listeners already. Here's Ben and James with some mind-boggling questions that we can answer in future episodes.
Hi, I'm Ben. My question is, how did the Big Bang happen? Hello, I'm James. And my question is, how does electricity transmit messages?
And here's Jake and his comments about our multiverse podcast.
I am a multiverse believer because I love the idea that my toy Beaky could be walking and talking in another universe. I also think that the multiverse could be part of a multiverse and so on. I would like to be a superhero that protects animals in another universe.
Fantastic. And of course, don't forget to pick up the latest copy of the Week Junior's Science and Nature for even more mysteries.
And be sure to keep listening to this podcast as well. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with our next investigation.
No, we won't.
What do you mean?
I'm sorry to say this, Mike, but this is our last ever episode.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I'm afraid it is, Stevie.
But you said right at the start this was the first episode of Series 3, not the last episode ever.
Well, things have changed since we started recording.
Oh.
That's sad.
April Fool!
That's so mean.
Come on, guys. Did you learn nothing from what Phil just said? Sorry if I scared any of you listeners. We will be back in 2 weeks' time, I promise, with our next episode.
So what we've mainly learned is don't listen to Dan. That's right. We'll be journeying to Easter Island. Its native name is Rapa Nui, and it's one of the world's most isolated places. We will try and solve the mystery of the Moai, a number of large stone statues with faces carved into them. How did the island's original inhabitants build these statues, and what purpose do they serve? Join us and some expert guests to find out more. Until then, stay curious.